Admiral Xenthal stood motionless before the Grand Council's viewing screen, mandibles clicking softly as she processed the sensor data. The massive chamber, hewn from living crystal in the heart of the Krylonian Empire's capital ship, filled with murmurs of disbelief. Impossible, she finally declared, her crystalline exoskeleton catching the light of 1,000 data streams. These readings must be corrupted. No species could achieve interstellar travel with such primitive propulsion systems. The Council's coordinator, Valithris, leaned forward on his levitating throne. His ancient eyes, compound clusters of brilliant emerald, focused on the crude vessel displayed in the hologram. And yet, Admiral, there they are. These humans have somehow stumbled into our territory. The human ship was ungainly, a patchwork of metal and ceramics that offended Krylonian aesthetic sensibilities. It used chemical propulsion, of all things, enhanced by what appeared to be crude manipulation of gravitational fields. The vessel's hull bore scars of micrometeorite impacts and solar radiation. No self-respecting Krylonian ship would ever show such wear. They're broadcasting on multiple frequencies, reported Science Director Melkera, her neural tendrils writhing in agitation. The messages are remarkably simple. Binary code, electromagnetic pulses, even primitive radio waves. They're practically shouting their presence. Admiral Xenthal's mandibles clicked again, this time in amusement, like children announcing themselves to the void. Have they no concept of stealth, no understanding of the dangers that lurk between the stars? The human ship continued its awkward approach toward the Krylonian border outpost. Its engines flared sporadically, as if the vessel was struggling against the solar winds. Behind it trailed a wake of radiation that any Krylonian cadet would know made them visible for light years. Their weapons, Xenthal continued, bringing up another holographic overlay, are equally primitive. Kinetic projectiles, directed energy weapons that barely qualify as more than industrial cutting tools. Their shields. She paused, mandibles twitching. They appear to have none at all. The council chamber erupted in crystalline laughter, the sound reverberating through the living walls. These humans were barely more advanced than the stone tool users the Empire occasionally found on forgotten worlds. Valithris raised a limb for silence. And yet, he said softly, they are here. They have crossed the vast distances between stars. Perhaps we should not be so quick to dismiss. Coordinator, Xenthal interrupted, her tone respectful but firm. I have commanded the Empire's fleets for 3 centuries. I have overseen the integration or elimination of 17 species. These humans, she gestured at the hologram with undisguised contempt. They are no threat. Their arrival here is nothing more than cosmic happenstance. The coordinator's eyes dimmed slightly. Very well, Admiral. How do you recommend we proceed? Standard protocol for primitive species. Send a battle group to their vessel. If they submit to integration into the Empire, we will uplift them gradually. If they resist, her mandibles spread in what passed for a smile among her kind, we will make an example of them. As the council murmured their approval, only Science Director Melkera seemed troubled. Her neural tendrils coiled tightly as she studied the humans' transmission patterns. There was something about them, some underlying structure she couldn't quite grasp. It was almost as if Battle Group 7, Xenthal commanded, intercept the human vessel. Show them the might of the Krylonian Empire. The crystalline ships of Battle Group 7 emerged from their quantum bubbles, their forms perfect manifestations of Krylonian superiority. They surrounded the human vessel in a classic hexagonal containment pattern, weapons charged but inactive. A display of overwhelming force meant to induce immediate surrender. The human ship went dark. They're powering down. Xenthal's mandibles clicked in satisfaction. As expected, they recognized the human vessel exploded. Not from weapons fire, not from a reactor breach, but in a carefully calculated pattern that sent chunks of its hull spinning in precise trajectories toward each Krylonian ship. Before anyone could react, these fragments, each packed with what would later be identified as primitive but devastating explosives, detonated against the crystalline hulls. The Krylonian ship's perfect geometries shattered. In the chaos that followed, as Battle Group 7's distress calls flooded the council chamber, Science Director Melkara finally understood what had bothered her about the humans' transmission patterns. They hadn't been broadcasting their presence randomly. They had been mapping Krylonian shield harmonics with each transmission, probing for weaknesses with signals that seemed too primitive to be a threat. As the council erupted in panic, Melkara's neural tendrils writhed with a new sensation: fear. The humans hadn't stumbled into Krylonian space. They had been hunting. The Krylonian High Command Center buzzed with frenzied activity as damage reports flooded in from across 3 sectors. Admiral Xenthal's crystalline form had lost its luster, dulled by stress and lack of rest. Before her, a strategic display showed an empire in chaos, not from massive battles or overwhelming forces, but from something far more insidious. Another supply convoy lost in the Arcturus sector, reported Commander Kelvax, his voice strained. Same pattern as the others. No distress call, no wreckage. They simply vanished. Xenthal's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of extreme agitation. Impossible. We doubled the escort fleet. Added quantum sensors. Changed the route. How are they doing this? The humans had not declared war. They had not amassed fleets. They had not even made demands. Instead, in the 3 months since the Battle Group 7 incident, they had become ghosts. Silent predators that struck without warning and disappeared without trace. "Show me the convoy's last known position," Xenthal commanded. The holographic display zoomed in on a seemingly empty sector of space. Standard trade routes pulsed with pale light, while defensive installations glowed like crystalline stars. Everything appeared normal, except there. Melkara spoke softly from her station, neural tendrils writhing thoughtfully. "The background radiation. It's different." "Different how?" Xenthal demanded. "It's too perfect." Melkara manipulated the display, highlighting subtle patterns in the cosmic background radiation. "Natural radiation has random fluctuations. This is too uniform, as if someone laid a blanket over our sensors," Kelvax finished, his exoskeleton paling. "They're not avoiding our detection networks. They're feeding them false data." Xenthal's mandibles snapped shut. The humans had turned the Empire's own sophistication against it. Krylonian sensors were designed to detect the energy signatures of advanced technology. Quantum drives, plasma weapons, dimensional shields. But these humans, with their primitive technology, had found ways to hide in plain sight. "New contact," a sensor operator suddenly called out, multiple signatures emerging from the Helios debris field. The tactical display erupted with red markers as human ships seemed to materialize from nowhere. They weren't sleek or crystalline like Krylonian vessels. They were rough, asymmetrical, covered in what appeared to be space debris and asteroidal rock. "They've been there the whole time," Melkara whispered, "hiding in the debris field, powered down, letting their crude hulls mask them from our sensors. We've been looking for energy signatures while they've been playing dead." The human ships moved with devastating purpose. They didn't engage in traditional combat formations or energy weapon exchanges. Instead, they launched what appeared to be mining charges, simple fusion devices normally used for breaking up asteroids. The charges detonated in precise patterns, creating waves of debris that overwhelmed Krylonian shields calibrated for energy weapons. "Launch interceptors," Xenthal commanded. "Full quantum field deployment." But the humans were already gone, leaving behind a graveyard of shattered crystal ships and a carefully orchestrated debris field that would make future sensor sweeps of the area nearly impossible. In the aftermath, as damage control teams struggled to restore order, Science Director Melkara made a chilling discovery. She found that the patterns of debris weren't random. When analyzed through multiple spectrums, they formed a clear message in simple binary. You see only what you expect to see. The message was followed by coordinates, the location of the next convoy route the Empire had planned in secret. They're not just attacking us, Melkara reported to the increasingly desperate admiral. They're studying us, learning our patterns. Each strike gives them more data about how we think, how we react, how we plan. But how? Senful demanded. Their technology is centuries behind ours. Their weapons are primitive. Their ships are practically held together with wire and hope. Perhaps Melkara's neural tendrils coiled thoughtfully. That is precisely why they're winning. We built our empire on the assumption that advancement meant complexity. They've turned simplicity into a weapon. As if to emphasize her point, long-range sensors detected a new anomaly. Hundreds of small objects, barely larger than escape pods, were detected entering Empire space from multiple vectors. Most appeared to be simple satellites or debris. The Empire's automated defense systems, designed to target sophisticated threats, ignored them completely. Melkara's analysis suggested that less than 1% of these objects were actual threats. The problem was, there was no way to tell which ones without diverting massive resources to investigate each object. They're not trying to defeat us in battle, Melkara concluded. They're making us defeat ourselves. The next day, 3 more convoys disappeared without a trace, while the Empire's mighty fleets chased shadows through the void. The Krylonian War Council chamber had changed dramatically since the conflict began. Gone were the ornate crystalline displays and floating data streams. Instead, crude holographic projectors, copies of human technology, cast harsh shadows across worried faces. The Empire had learned the hard way that their advanced systems were too easily compromised. Grand Coordinator Valithris's once pristine exoskeleton now bore stress fractures as he studied the latest reports. 6 months, he said quietly. 6 months since we dismissed them as primitive, and now we're adopting their methods just to survive. Admiral Xenthal stood before the council, her own form showing signs of deterioration. We've confirmed our suspicions, Coordinator. The humans didn't just recently achieve spaceflight. They've been watching us, studying us, for decades. The revelation sent shivers through the assembled council members. Melkara stepped forward, her neural tendrils now encased in protective sheaths. Another adaptation, forced by necessity. She activated a series of images showing crude human satellites, ancient space probes, and seemingly derelict spacecraft. These objects, she explained, what we dismissed as space debris or failed attempts at exploration. They were sensors, data gatherers. The humans seeded our space with them long before we knew they existed. Their primitive technology made them invisible to our sophisticated detection systems. Every defeat, Xenthal continued, every lost ship, every failed defense. They're not random. The humans are executing a plan centuries in the making. They let us see exactly what they wanted us to see, a primitive species stumbling into space. The tactical display showed the steady retreat of Krylonian forces across multiple sectors. But it wasn't a retreat driven by decisive battles or overwhelming force. Instead, the Empire was being dismantled through 1,000 small cuts, each precisely calculated to cause maximum disruption with minimal resource expenditure. Look at this pattern. Melkara highlighted a series of seemingly unconnected incidents. When we reinforce a position, they don't attack it directly. They target supply lines, communication relays, civilian transport routes. When we adapt, they change tactics. Not randomly, but in ways that suggest they predicted our adaptations. A junior council member spoke up, his voice trembling. But how? How could they possibly predict? Because they understand something we forgot. Valithris interrupted, his ancient eyes dimming. The pattern of evolution itself. While we perfected our technology, they perfected adaptation. Every solution we devise is based on our understanding of warfare. An understanding they studied and prepared for long before we knew they existed. Melkara brought up new data streams. We've analyzed their historical records. what little we've managed to decode. Their entire history is an endless cycle of conflict and adaptation. They don't just fight wars. They learn from them. Each defeat teaches them new ways to victory. The display showed human battles across centuries, primitive conflicts with spears and swords, mechanized warfare, nuclear standoffs, and finally, their emergence into space. But unlike the Krylonians, who had developed in a straight line toward technological sophistication, humans had developed in all directions simultaneously. They never abandoned their primitive weapons, Hexenthal noted with growing horror. They just kept adding new layers. A human soldier might carry an energy weapon and still know how to fashion a spear. Their ships use quantum communications but maintain backup systems using simple radio waves. And now, Melkera added, they're using that adaptability against us. Our defense systems are designed to counter technological threats. But how do you defend against an enemy that might attack with a gravity beam or a sharpened stick, and has mastered both? As if to punctuate her point, alarms blared throughout the chamber. On the display, a massive Krylonian battle fleet was going dark, its sophisticated systems failing one by one. The cause? Simple electromagnetic pulses, technology the Empire had considered obsolete centuries ago. We're not just fighting their weapons, Obliterate concluded, his voice heavy with realization. We're fighting their entire evolutionary history, every war they've ever fought, every adaptation they've ever made, every lesson they've ever learned. It's all being used against us. The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. The humans hadn't needed to mash Krylonian technology to defeat them. They had simply needed to understand it and find its weaknesses using every tool at their disposal, no matter how primitive those tools might seem. They're not just warriors, Melkera whispered. They're students of war itself. And we've been their most detailed lesson yet. In the darkness of space, another Krylonian fleet disappeared, not with a grand battle, but with a whisper, undone by an enemy that had learned to transform simplicity into the ultimate weapon. Deep within the last secure Krylonian fortress world, Admiral Hexenthal faced a truth more terrifying than any weapon: mathematics. The holographic displays before her showed probability matrices, battle algorithms, and fleet movements, all of them pointing to one inexorable conclusion. Our predictive models have failed, Melkera announced to the remnants of the War Council. Her neural tendrils twitched spasmodically as she processed the data, not because they're flawed, but because they're too perfect. The assembled leaders stared at the central display, where a representation of Empire space flickered like a dying star. Nearly half of their territory had gone dark, not conquered, but rendered mathematically impossible to defend. Explain, Obliterate commanded, his once luminescent form now dull to an ashen gray. Melkera manipulated the display, highlighting conflict zones across multiple sectors. The humans aren't just fighting us. They're solving us. Each engagement, whether they win or lose, gives them more data about our mathematical patterns. Our battle algorithms are the most advanced in known space, protested a general, his crystalline armor bearing fresh stress fractures. They account for millions of variables, quantum uncertainties. Exactly, Hexenthal interrupted, mandibles clicking in grim understanding. They're too perfect, too predictable in their complexity. The humans. She paused, struggling with the concept. They've turned our mathematical precision into a weakness. The display shifted, showing a recent battle. A Krylonian defense fleet, executing perfectly calculated maneuvers, had been destroyed by human ships that seemed to move randomly. Except it wasn't random at all. Look here, Melkera highlighted the humans' attack pattern. They're using primitive number sequences, Fibonacci spirals, golden ratios, mathematical concepts so basic we dismissed them as irrelevant to modern warfare. But why would they abandon advanced calculations for such simple mathematics? Obliterate demanded. Because simplicity, Hexenthal replied, is chaos we don't understand. She gestured at the battle replay. Our ships moved perfectly, According to quantum-calculated battle algorithms, the humans moved according to patterns found in tree branches and seashells. We can't predict them because we've forgotten how to think that simply. New alarms blared. Another sector was going dark. But this time, the humans hadn't attacked directly. They had introduced a cascading error into the Empire's defense grid, using nothing more sophisticated than a binary sequence that matched the growth pattern of a common Earth plant. They're not trying to outthink our battle computers, Melchiorra realized. They're feeding them problems they can't solve. Paradoxes, mathematical concepts so basic they're incomprehensible to our advanced systems. The display showed more human ships entering Empire space. Their movements followed patterns found in nature. The swirl of galaxies, the branching of lightning, the flow of rivers, the Krylonian defense systems, designed to counter weapons of unimaginable complexity, were helpless against attacks based on such fundamental principles. We built our empire on the assumption that advancement meant moving forward, Valethris said quietly. The humans understand that sometimes the most advanced solution is to step backward. The junior analyst rushed into the chamber, his crystalline form vibrating with urgency. New data from the outer sectors. The humans, they're not using encryption for their communications anymore. What are they using? Senthil demanded. Simple sound waves. Patterns matching something they call music. Our quantum decryption systems can't process it. They're designed to crack codes, not art. The implications hit Melchiorra like a physical blow. They're not just attacking our territory, she whispered. They're attacking the very foundations of how we think. Every strength we developed, every advancement we achieved, they've turned into a vulnerability. The display updated one final time, showing a message from the human fleet. It wasn't encoded in quantum states or transmitted through subspace. It was a simple pattern of light and dark, like the shadows of leaves on the ground. When decoded, it read, "The universe's greatest mathematicians are its smallest creatures. We learned from them. Did you?" Valethris stared at the message, his ancient eyes finally understanding. "We sought to master the universe through complexity," he said. "They learned to master complexity through simplicity." As if to prove his point, another sector went dark, defeated not by advanced weapons, but by an attack pattern based on the dance of honeybees. The Empire's mathematics of war, perfected over millennia, was being undone by the mathematics of nature. And the humans, those supposedly primitive creatures, had known it would happen from the very beginning. In the final bastion of the Krylonian Empire, Admiral Senthil stood before the combined survivors of the War Council and High Command. The once magnificent crystal chamber was now bare of ornamentation, stripped of technology, illuminated only by simple chemical lights, a final adaptation learned too late from their human adversaries. "They're here," she announced simply. No one needed to ask who they were. The human fleet had arrived at their doorstep, not in a grand armada, but in waves of small ships that seemed to mimic the migration patterns of ancient earth birds. "What are their demands?" Valethris asked, his once pristine form now weathered by defeat. Melchiorra's neural tendrils coiled tightly as she studied the transmission. "That's the most terrifying part," she whispered. "They haven't made any. They're waiting." "Waiting for what?" The question echoed through the chamber. "For us to understand," Senthil replied, "just as they've waited for centuries. Watching. Learning." She activated a final holographic display, crude by their former standards, but harder to compromise. "I've been studying their evolutionary history. I finally understand why we never had a chance." The display showed Earth's history, not of technology or civilization, but of life itself. Single-celled organisms learning to cooperate, fish venturing onto land, small mammals surviving while giants perished. Humans aren't just another species that achieved spaceflight, Melchiorra continued, her scientific training giving way to a deeper understanding. They're the product of an unbroken chain of survivors. Every one of their ancestors, stretching back billions of years, faced extinction and found a way to continue. But we evolved too, protested a council member. All species do. No, Valithris said quietly. We optimized. We found a path and perfected it. Humans. He gestured at the display. Humans never stopped exploring every path. Their bodies remember every crisis their species ever faced. Their minds carry the lessons of every near extinction they've survived. The display shifted to show human conflicts across history. But now, viewed through the lens of evolution, a pattern emerged. Humans didn't just fight wars, they adapted through them. Every defeat taught them new ways to survive. Every victory showed them new ways to triumph. Look at how they fought us, Zenthal pointed out. When we adapted to one strategy, they didn't just change tactics, they completely transformed their approach. Like a species evolving to fill a new ecological niche. They used our own evolution against us, Melkara added. We evolved to be perfect within our understanding of warfare. They evolved to find the gaps in any understanding. A new signal appeared, simple radio waves carrying a voice, a human voice, speaking in clear, unencrypted language. We know you understand now. That's why we waited. Every species must face this moment, when they realize that the true test isn't mastering the universe, but learning to adapt to it. The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. The humans hadn't fought them to destroy them. This entire conflict had been a lesson. Brutal and costly, but a lesson nonetheless. They're offering us a choice, Valithris realized. Adapt or... No, Melkara interrupted. They're offering us understanding. The same understanding their ancestors gained when they looked up at bigger, stronger creatures and realized that survival doesn't always mean being the most advanced. Outside, the human ships held position, their formation mimicking the hunting patterns of Earth's ancient pack predators. They didn't need to demonstrate their power. The very fact that they were here, that they had reduced the mighty Krylonian Empire to this moment, was demonstration enough. So what do we do? Someone asked. Admiral Zenthal, who had begun this conflict dismissing humans as primitive, stood straight. We learn. We adapt. We survive. We do what they've done for billions of years. Her mandibles clicked with newfound respect. We evolve. The human voice returned, carrying what they now recognized as wisdom earned through eons of struggle. Welcome to the real universe, where perfection is the enemy of survival and adaptation is the only eternal truth. As the Krylonian Empire faced its moment of truth, the humans waited patiently. After all, they understood better than anyone that true evolution takes time. They had waited millions of years to reach the stars. They could wait a little longer for their newest students to learn the ultimate lesson, that in a universe of infinite possibilities, the ability to change is the only constant worth perfecting. The end.